authorities to pick up members of the attacker's family. That standard practice. It doesn't mean that they were necessarily connected. We have had here the first elements of the joint Russian and Turkish investigation team. We saw the Russian forensics team go into the building behind me where the attack took place, where the Russian ambassador was gunned down. It was all caught on camera. The video that you're about to see is very disturbing.
Leaders of Turkey and Russia are calling it a provocative terrorist act. The assassination of Russia's ambassador to Turkey, caught on video. Andrei Karlov shot multiple times in the back while giving a speech at an Ankara art exhibit on Monday night. The gunman shouting defiantly, "God is greatest," and "Do not forget Aleppo, do not forget Syria." According to Turkey's interior minister, the lone gunman is a 22-year-old police officer born in Turkey. His body taken from the scene after he was shot and killed by security. Many blame Russia for its part in supporting Syria's president in the civil war and the ongoing humanitarian crisis. The assassination won't damage relations, pledging to step up the fight against terror and saying, quote, "Criminals will feel the heat." The president of Turkey agreeing, calling the attack a provocation aimed at driving a wedge between the two countries. The US State Department condemning the attack.
We stand ready to offer any assistance that may be required to Russia and Turkey as they investigate this despicable attack.
Just hours later, another frightening incident, this time outside the United States Embassy in the same neighborhood where the ambassador was assassinated. Turkish police arresting a man who fired into the air with a shotgun, yelling in Turkish, "I swear to God, don't play with us."
Now, the United States Embassy just a few hundred yards from here, that is closed today, along with US consulates across the country. Meanwhile, in Moscow, you have Russian, Turkish and Iranian foreign ministers meeting to figure out the humanitarian disaster as we now have increased again between Russia and Turkey. Chris?
All right, Nick, thank you very much. President-elect Donald Trump creating controversy with his rapid response to the attacks in Turkey and Berlin, labeling both Islamic terror, while authorities in both situations seem unsure. CNN political reporter Sarah Murray live in Palm Beach, Florida, where Trump is on vacation, supposedly at Mar-a-Lago, dealing with the transition. Sarah.
Good morning, Chris. Well, from his vacation estate here, he offered up a flurry of statements yesterday, offering his concern but also condemnation for the assassination of the Russian ambassador to Turkey, but also for this attack on a Berlin Christmas market. And as you pointed out, he wasted no time in tying both instances to radical Islamic terrorism, even though investigations continue in those cases. He also vowed to come together with freedom-loving partners in an effort to eradicate terrorism across the world. Now, in addition to putting out these statements, he also took to Twitter to address not just the attack in Turkey as well as the one in Berlin, but also an incident in Switzerland where a gunman opened fire in a mosque. On Twitter, he said, "Today there were terror attacks in Turkey, Switzerland, and Germany, and it is only getting worse. The civilized world must change its thinking." So clearly not a lot of vacationing happening for Donald Trump here. In addition to transition meetings, we expect he will be getting updates on what is happening in Berlin and what is happening in Turkey, although so far his advisors have not been able to tell us who is briefing the president-elect at this point. Back to you, Allison.
Okay, Sarah, thank you very much. Joining us now to talk about the various attacks that we are seeing this morning, U.S. State Department spokesperson John Kirby. John, it's hard to know where to start because there are so many sort of gruesome things happening, but let's just talk about for a moment the Russian ambassador, because your agency, the State Department, is obviously tasked with protecting U.S. ambassadors around the world. Is that job getting harder?
it's always a tough job. You know, I mean, we take the force protection of our ambassadors and our embassy personnel very, very seriously, and it varies from almost week to week depending on where you're stationed around the world. So it's something we're constantly focused on, constantly evaluating, reassessing, and changing our force protection posture as needed. Now, obviously, as you just saw in Nick's report, we're very much on guard there in Turkey. He's right. Our consulates and our embassy are closed today out of an abundance of caution because of the incident yesterday, as well as the shooting outside our embassy last night in Ankara. So obviously we're taking this real seriously, and we're going to constantly sort of evaluate now almost hour by hour.
John, let's talk about the situation that happened with this Russian ambassador, Andrei Karlov. He was at an art show. Yeah. It's hard to imagine a more innocuous setting, quite frankly. So was this a security lapse?
Well, first of all, I want to offer our thoughts and prayers to Ambassador Karlov's family and to the Russian people. It's absolutely despicable, reprehensible that here you have a diplomat that, as you noted, Allison, is doing what diplomats do. You know, he went to an art gallery. He was participating in what we call public diplomacy events. All of that is what we're supposed to be doing in the world of diplomacy, and certainly had no reason to suspect that this would have been his last event, his last day. Now, as for a security lapse, I think all that's going to be investigated. And we don't want to get ahead of the Russians and Turks who are now jointly investigating this. Obviously, there was some security problem, or this man wouldn't have been able to get in to do what he did. Now, as I understand it, and information is sort of preliminary, he's an off-duty police officer, and he may have used his credentials to gain access to the venue. All that will be and should be investigated, and I'm sure that they will get to the bottom of this. We have offered our help as well. I'm not aware that they've agreed to take us up on that, but Secretary Kerry was very clear yesterday that if there's anything we can do to help in the investigation, we stand by.
Let's talk about what's going on in Berlin, Germany right now. You know, there's been this terrible truck attack that mowed down people at a Christmas market. The State Department, your State Department, issued a warning in November to U.S. citizens traveling to Europe during the holidays.
Right. Yeah.
Should Americans not feel safe going to Europe right now?
No, that wasn't the purpose of the alert. You're right. We issued that right before Thanksgiving, and we made particular note to be vigilant around festivals and open public events such as Christmas markets. We want people to be vigilant. We want them to be self-aware. We want them to put, to keep their head on a swivel as they're out and about. I myself shopped at that exact Christmas market just a couple of weeks ago when we were in Berlin for an event with the German Foreign Ministry. So you want to be out and about, and we don't want to discourage people from traveling to Europe or to elsewhere around the world, particularly around the holidays. It's just really a matter of being alert and cognizant of your surroundings, and making sure that you're looking after those in your party as well. But certainly we don't want to discourage travel to Europe.
But John, why did you go to the length of issuing that warning? What information was it that prompted it?
There wasn't any specific threat information that led to that alert, and I would remind you that we issued a similar travel alert for Europe back in May in advance of the summer travel months. This is something we typically do. We normally do it. So there wasn't any specific threat information that led to this one back in November, just a general sense that we got through our own interagency processes that open events like this could be something that could come under some sort of attack by those who wish us ill, whether it's Islamic terrorists or others. So I mean, this was just again an act of prudence. It's something that we always do and will continue to do going forward.
Well, that's a little bit different than what earlier this year the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, said. He warned something a little bit more specific than what you're saying. He said that terror cells are operating in Germany. He said, quote, "We continue to see evidence of plotting on the part of ISIS." So, I hear what you're saying, that people should always be aware of their surroundings, have their head on a swivel. But really, if you're shopping, how are you supposed to get out of the way of a semi-truck barreling towards you?
Oh, and an attack like that is obviously very difficult to predict and certainly to prevent. Also, if you're an innocent bystander and a shopper, to get out of the way. We're not at all faulting anybody who fell victim to this terrible attack at all. All we're saying is that there's enough information out there, nothing specific and credible to a particular market or a particular street, but there's enough information and concern out there that we want people to just be aware and to be vigilant when they're out and about in an open-air setting like that. That was the purpose for the alert. And, you know, we're obviously going to continue to assess and analyze information as it comes in. And if we feel like we need to update that or be more specific going forward, we'll certainly do it.
Let's talk about the attacks that in the past 48 hours we've seen globally. These are only the big ones that we know of at the moment, but let's just break it down. In Zurich, Switzerland, there was an attack on a mosque. In Berlin, of course, the truck attack that we've been talking about. In Ankara, of course, what we've been talking about, the Russian ambassador who was assassinated. Right. In Yemen, there was a suicide bomber who killed 50 people. John, do you see a connection here, or are we trying to find a pattern that doesn't exist?
I think it's somewhere in the middle, Allison. I mean, don't forget there was also an attack in Jordan that now we're hearing Daesh has claimed responsibility for. Obviously, terrorist networks, and again, I don't want to make a leap here on the attack in Berlin or the attack in Turkey yesterday. Those are under investigation, but you know, even in Berlin, they're saying they're presuming it to be a terrorist attack. But let's put that aside for a second. We are obviously seeing terrorist networks who are under pressure and under threat, particularly Daesh, look for low-cost, low-resource, high-impact events to try to continue to attract people to their narrative, to their pernicious ideology. And so we're seeing this all around the world, and it is something we all need to stay focused on. Look, counterterrorism is something that threatens everybody, and that's why in the United States we continue to try to find cooperative ways to work with allies, partners, other nations around the world to share information, to analyze that information, and to be able to use it to try to get ahead of these sorts of attacks. But it's a difficult thing to do. Remember, they only have to be right once. We have to be right 365 days, 24 hours of each and every one of those days, and that's a very difficult thing to do. We know we have stopped attacks here in the United States. We know that our partners in Europe have also likewise prevented and stopped attacks from happening, but it's going to be very difficult to do that when all you have to, when one person has it in their mind that they want to kill innocent people, and they'll do it in a low-cost way.
John Kirby, we know how busy it is there at the State Department today. Thank you very much for taking time for New Day.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Chris.
All right, we are following breaking news from the Czech Republic. Two-time Wimbledon champion Petra Kvitova says an armed robber broke into Kvitova's apartment and she was injured defending herself. She suffered damage to the tendons and fingers on her left hand, which is her playing hand. She says the injury is severe and she is fortunate to be alive. The robber is still on the run.
Well, teams searching for MH370 say it is likely that they've been looking in the wrong place. A new report out recommends that they shift to a new search area, the northeast of the current location in the Indian Ocean. The search is slated to end in early 2017. That Malaysia Airlines flight, you'll remember, of course, vanished on its way from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing back in 2014. 239 people were on board.
President-elect Donald Trump will soon be responsible for America's reaction to these types of terror attacks that we're seeing. So what do we expect based on what he is doing now? We're going to ask a top member of the transition team, and also the president-elect was just tweeting about something that's almost completely off topic. Why?